I think Star Wars, uniquely in its mythology, is about cycles of life and teachers, mentors, parents, children. It's got that generational aspect to it.
There's this idea of the handing on of sabers and the handing on of a Jedi legacy. And so we have that, I think, as a generation that has inherited the characters and the stories. Just like in Star Wars, it's a privilege and it's a responsibility.
Rey Skywalker.
The Star Wars sequel trilogy is one of the most interesting topics to talk about on the internet.
No, you gotta tickle their balls a little bit. Tickle them more. How about this? You won't believe actor joins film.
Especially if you're in the Star Wars community. For as many people like it, there seems to be an equal amount of people who dislike it. And between both factions, there are fans who are stuck in the middle of the conflict, like poor Lupita Nyong'o at the 2022 Oscars. I got a strong affection for the sequel trilogy era, and as divisively written and even undefined as some of these characters are, I hold Finn, Rey, Janna, Kylo, Hux, Rose, Babu Frick, Phasma, Babu Frick, Poe, Claude, Babu Frick, and the rest of the characters close to my heart. Babu Frick, maybe because of what they could have been, or maybe because I still have hope of what they could be. That being said, I view The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker as the greatest examples of missed opportunities in film. A textbook example of how corporate greed, morally bankrupt industry politics, and a creatively inept parent company can compromise a trilogy that should have been the greatest entry in the franchise instead of a cautionary tale of what not to do when making a trilogy. And despite all that being said, I view the sequel trilogy characters as the future of Star Wars, and the only way the franchise will ever grow out of the shadow of George Lucas.
Excuse me.
And yeah. I know. You're ready to click off the video.
You damn straight.
Let's rip the band-aid off. Disney only had one plan when it came to Star Wars: make as much money as possible, as quickly as possible to earn back their $4 billion investment. That's not even a hot take. Disney rushed every Star Wars film to the point that even Lucasfilm and the directors working on the projects had to request more time and creative freedom, yet were denied. And guess what? It ended up with the anthology films basically being put on pause for God knows how long. It's been years now, we still haven't had another anthology film. Many people like to assume that for some reason, the micromanaging supercorporation that is historically known to be difficult to work with would somehow not be overbearing to one of their biggest investments. But I guess nose candy is getting cheaper because some of you
Ooh, you kiss your mother with that mouth?
I'm not going to waste anyone's time going over where Lucasfilm went wrong, where Disney went wrong, who did what, because I've already made multiple videos on it. The point I'm trying to make is that regardless of if you care whose fault it is, which many people don't because they really just want to stay mad for the sake of being mad, regardless of if it changes anything. You see, at the end of the day, no matter how many spin-offs we get, and between the prequels and the originals, or the originals and the sequels, all roads lead to the sequels, for better or worse. I don't think the sequel trilogy will age like the prequels, not even close. The prequel trilogy aged how it did, because despite the divisive reaction to what George Lucas did in the films, his story shined bright throughout the execution and the presentation. It was his pure creative vision. If you didn't like the prequels, if you did like the prequels, that at the end of the day was because of George Lucas. There was no one else to blame. Those were his ideas. The sequel trilogy does not have that benefit at all. By all accounts, the productions of The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker had ended up a three-way compromise between Bad Robot, Lucasfilm, and Disney, with the productions rushed to unbearable degrees. While The Last Jedi may have been a more collaborative process from all parties involved, its story was a complete deviation from The Force Awakens and did nothing to set up most of the things that people would have to pick up for the next film. On top of all that, the sequel trilogy is filled with Disney's more regressive habits of stereotyping their characters and reducing the significance of certain other characters depending on the color of their skin. Likewise, just trying to push the blame on J.J. Abrams due to an inability to read or research isn't going to magically make the poor management from Disney any better. It's not going to erase the very public reasons certain things happened. If anything, it seems like Bad Robot and Abrams were the ones who actually wanted to take chances, and it was the studio who pushed for more derivative options. Seriously, read the J. Paxis leaks that got everything correct to the letter and went into detail about all the reshoots. That said, how many things were changed and for the worst? Or or look at any of the early concept art for The Rise of Skywalker that were based on early versions of the script. Not to be confused with Colin Trevorrow's Duel of the Fates that also went through a lot of extensive reshoots that people seem to ignore when they talk about it, like Mortis and Coruscant being taken out of the final product. Read or listen to any interview that details the troubled working relationship Bad Robot and Lucasfilm were having with Disney at the time or with each other. Or, you know, just look up any interview anywhere that has to deal with Disney's micromanaging of all their productions.
I'd always, I've been very fortunate, in that the films that I've directed, I've always really, the path that I wanted to follow and the path that everyone involved wanted to follow was the same. And it's totally possible for, people to see two totally different paths through the woods. So, that was just an experience that obviously you can imagine, as all of these things, like it can get to the point of being, traumatic when there's something that you care about that much and you've invested that much in it. But that's one of the things that you accept when you take on any role in film, and especially when you become a storyteller, that there are going to be heartbreaks. There's going to be crushing disappointments, and then there's going to be victories, and hopefully they'll balance out.
There's nothing more important than knowing where you're going. And there are projects that I've worked on where we had some ideas, but we hadn't worked through them enough. We had sometimes we had some ideas, but then we weren't allowed to do them the way we wanted to. I've had all sorts of situations where, you plan things in a certain way, and you suddenly find yourself doing something that's 180 degrees different. And then sometimes it works really well, and you feel like, wow, that really came together. And other times you think, oh my God, I can't believe this is where we are. And sometimes when it's not working out, it's because it's what you planned. And other times when it's not working out, it's because it didn't. It's like you never really know. But having a plan, I have learned in some cases the hard way, is the most, critical thing.
I do think one day we will get a director's cut of The Rise of Skywalker. Whatever is in that version, I have no idea, but I do believe a more faithful version to the film that J.J. Abrams and the creative team behind The Rise of Skywalker wanted to make does exist somewhere out there over the rainbow. Now, I'm sure just by saying there's an alternate version of The Rise of Skywalker somewhere out there, even if it's just an extended film, even if it's just film with different scenes in it here and there but the same context, there's certain checkmarks on Twitter who will now roll their eyes. But since I don't perform, metaphorically speaking, Nancy Reagan, regardless of if or when that day comes, what's been really on my mind isn't on the sequel trilogy, but rather what happens now that the sequel trilogy is over. As much as everyone thinks Lucasfilm is just going to produce endless stories set between the prequels and the originals, or set after the originals and before the sequels, all roads, like I said, lead to the sequel trilogy, and that story is done. Disney isn't erasing them, no matter what Doom Penis says. Yeah, certain things may end up retcons because that's to be expected, especially these days with modern Star Wars and Filoni. Special editions, director's cuts, books, comics, novels. No matter what, there needs to be a story that comes after the sequels. We know where every story has to go. Obi-Wan's story ends at A New Hope. Cassian's story ends at Rogue One. The Mandalorian story will eventually end when Grogu toys end up desensitizing people to his cuteness, and Ahsoka's story will end. Probably never, yeah, that's a bet. But everything else, regardless of when it ends, is set in the past when it comes to these shows. It's time for Star Wars to start breaking new ground, moving the timeline forward, and the only way to do that, like it or not, is with the sequel trilogy characters. They're not gonna jump 500 years in the future because they already have the High Republic dealing with the past. That's basically a blank slate right there. So they're going to want to move forward with the actors who are already probably coming back if Kathleen Kennedy is anything to go off of. I say this as someone who fundamentally hates that Luke didn't bring back the Jedi in the sequel trilogy, and who disagrees with his depiction in The Last Jedi for 90% of the film, except this scene and this scene. I like those scenes. Yeah. Who thinks Palpatine should have stayed dead, even though I do think that, it's fucking Ian, man. He's having the time of his life. Who thinks Finn was underutilized despite being the best sequel trilogy character by a large margin. BTW, when I say underutilized, I don't mean he did nothing, I mean he didn't do enough because his character was the bomb. Who thinks it would have made more sense for Rey to be Anakin's grand—
Shut the fuck up.
Shut the fuck up, Friday.
I understand being disappointed in the sequels, but the timeline can't stop there. We have to keep moving forward. If some see these characters as weak and undefined, then it's time for Disney to pull up their big boy pants and make that $4 billion fucking investment worth it. You make these characters better. It's really not hard. And I'm not saying this to convince anyone to give the sequel trilogy or the sequel trilogy characters a second chance. I'm saying this as someone who knows these stories are going to come whether or not we like it or not. Kathleen Kennedy has already spoken on the future of Lucasfilm, and she intends to bring the sequel trilogy characters back. Daisy is having lunch with Kathleen Kennedy. She's back on social media now. John Boyega has said multiple times he's willing to return and wants his character to be done justice. Kelly Marie Tran is doing work for Lucasfilm again. Naomi Aki wants to return to Star Wars and has said so on many different occasions. And Oscar Isaac was kidnapped on the way to the Moon Knight set and had to act like he gave a shit about the shitty Star Wars cruiser hotel thing that for some reason both Padme and Leia got pregnant on. Oh my god, what the fuck, Disney? Listen, I get it. Disney screwed up, but all we can do is move forward. They're gonna do that whether or not we like it anyway. So I would rather them do things that could make these characters better than just keep stomping my feet saying don't do it and then just be miserable the whole time when they do it. I honestly believe that given the right execution and planning, a follow-up to the sequels would be warmly received if the characters and the story behind that follow-up were treated with care. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the sequel trilogy characters can have a story that would make them more universally liked and less divisive? What stories would you like them to tell? Where would you like to see these characters go? Whatever your thoughts, leave them in the comment section below. Be safe, be happy, drink your water, and I'll see you for the next video.